Hi friends, this is the Coastal Cowl, and what we have to do here is seam this edge to this edge. So I've left a nice long tail from my bind off. I've already blocked the cowl because it was easier to block flat than it would be once I've seamed it together, and then I'm essentially blocking something that's in the round. So I'm going to use that tail to seam up the piece. So I'm going to seam the two edges together. You'll notice they're a funky shape. That's okay. It's going to still seam straight. When you seam it, it will still make a nice straight line. So I'm going to grab my tail, thread it onto the tapestry needle, and begin seaming. What I'm going to do to begin is go just right under this first bound off stitch at the other edge of the cowl from where my tails are. And then I'm going to go back into the first stitch where the tail is coming out of. Okay. Then I'm going to start going just along the edge. Anytime I have stockinette or garter stitch, I'm going to go along the edge into the bars of the stockinette. So one row to one row. It's going to get a little different when we hit the lace section right here, but for now, I'm picking up one bar after another. So I'm not skipping any rows. If my most recent row was this one, I'm going to pick up the very next. And so forth. So I'm picking up one bar to one bar until I get to that garter stitch section, which is coming up next. So this one is essentially stockinette, bars to bars. Now here for the garter stitch, to make it a nice light seam, I'm going to pick up right in this ridge here, and then in the ridge on the opposite side. So ridge to ridge, ridge to ridge, ridge to ridge. And now I'm at the lace section. Before I do that lace section, I'm going to tighten this yarn here. It should pull smoothly for the most part. If it doesn't, that means you may have a little knot and you need to go and undo that and work it again. Usually if you have a knot, that means you went backwards a little bit and picked up a stitch that you've already gotten and therefore knotted your yarn. So now here at the edge right here, we've got some yarn overs right on the side. So I'm actually going to go a little bit more closer. I'm going to go a bit closer to the side of the work, to the edge of the fabric. So these are a little trickier to see, these bars. But same concept, we're diving in and scooping up rows along the edge of the work. Diving in, scooping up rows along the edge of the work for this portion. And since those yarn overs are right on the edge, that's why I'm being a little more delicate with this. Tighten it every so often. And you also want to double check that your stitches are matching up. So right, we have all these little panels of different stitch patterns. It's not a bad idea just to take a look every so often and make sure that they are matching. Okay, so now I'm at another garter section. And you'll notice that this is where the pattern had sort of shifted the angle, and it's irrelevant. We're just still seaming in a straight line. There's nothing special to do here. I'm taking these little ridges from the garter stitch, just grazing along them. But I'm making sure to only grab per each ridge. So I've grabbed this ridge, now I'm jumping up to the next. So I'm looking within the pattern, within the cowl, to make sure that I'm grabbing the correct spot. Sometimes we get a little tunnel vision if we're looking so closely at one area. We forget that really each group of stitches on the side relates directly to a row. Okay, so every so often you're going to pull tight to keep it closed. Make sure that you haven't made any knots, but I do like keeping it rather loose as I'm working so that I can see where I'm going, where I've come from and where I'm going. All right, so here now we're at the ribbing. It's a little trickier to see what you're doing here because you do have the decreasing right at the edge of the work. It's usually one of those big no-nos to decrease right at the edge of the work for this very reason, because it's pretty hard to see your stitches. But do your best here. We're diving in and grabbing up a bar or two, so a row or two. I happen to be going right under the decrease itself, or right along the edge of it, so it feels a little, for lack of a better word, clumpy, a little thick in those spots. And now here I am back at a garter stitch section, right near my corner, and that's where I will stop the seam. But let's see, so I'm grabbing garter, a garter ridge, and then a garter ridge right here, and then one more at the corner, pulling tight to close the seam. But there we go. Yeah, it was a little tricky to pull at the ribbing because it was under kind of thick fabric, those thick spots. And then once you have your seam fully pulled, then you can insert the needle on the top corner of one side and under the top corner of the other to connect the two sides at the top and make them look nice and smooth. Then the last step of the seaming of this shawl would be to weave in your tail. And I'm going to use this newly created seam on the wrong side to hide my tail in. That's one of my favorite parts about working seams, is that there's a natural spot to just hide tails right into the seams. So here we go. After I've gone about 1.5 inches in one direction, I double back and go about 3/4 of an inch in the opposite direction. And then we trim. And the piece is done. And now you have this beautiful cowl loop right here with a shawl bottom at the edge. Happy knitting!